John, Ralston, Saul, it's such a pleasure to meet you. It came by chance. We are in the same house for the festival of How the Light Gets In, and I found out what an interesting man you are. You're a successful writer, author, and also philosopher, historian. I now have one of your books. And you have been president of PEN, of International PEN, for what, 6 years?
6 years, yeah, terms.
2 terms. And there was something very important that you did while you were president for the sake of authors who are persecuted in their countries. Would you like to tell us?
Well, I mean, when people wanted me to run to be president, it's like a kind of an organization which has existed for a long time. It's I think it's, apart from the Red Cross, it's probably the oldest NGO. The Red Cross is an NGO.
What does PEN mean?
Poets, essayists, and novelists. But of course, it includes now filmmakers, and it always included playwrights.
And your predecessors were very important.
It's always, I found it, it's quite intimidating because it started with Galsworthy and
John Galsworthy.
John Galsworthy was the first president who really, he stayed about 10 years and really solidified it. And but then there are just a whole series of Nobel Prize winning authors, etc., who became president.
Like whom?
Oh, see, I should have prepared.
I remember some.
Arthur Miller was also a president, the playwright. It's Arthur Miller,
right?
Yeah. Was
and Vargas Llosa.
Vargas Llosa was president quite recently. If you want to stop the machine, I'll look it up and then I can.
No, that's okay. So you continue. So you're a president.
Homero Regis, the Mexican writer, was a very, very wonderful novelist. And the great protector of butterflies is the other thing he does. But so people asked me to run, and eventually a moment came when I felt I could take the time. I didn't realize that it would be 100% of the time because it's a volunteer job. And so I ran and I was elected, and I think there were a couple of other candidates. And first, it was very lucky that there's the president and there's the secretary general. It's very old-fashioned in structures, And the secretary general was elected just afterwards is Hori Takiaki, a Japanese writer. And we had to work out how to work together because there's a history, as often in these organizations, of two positions, and what do? They waste their time fighting over God knows what. So, I mean, we really walked around. I remember clearly in Japan, we went out for long walks and talked about how we were going to live together as a couple, really, it's, and what were we going to do with this organization, since we had the two most powerful positions. And there's a third position, and there was a very fine American, very generous humanist who had that position. So the three of us were there, and I said, what we have to do is we have to act as three. We have to, when we go in these...
Oh, this for the... Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thought you might want to say something.
Yeah.
Because I see a cup of tea over there. Someone wants that?
Yeah, that's mine. Yeah, it's
should I pour?
Please.
And for you?
If you make me black tea, that would be very nice.
Yeah, whereas mine is a herbal one.
Okay.
Yeah. I said we have to really try to do everything that we can together. I don't want to be just out there in front. I'd rather go into meetings, difficult meetings with you guys, and talk strategy. And the thing is, the writers come together once a year at congresses, which makes it sound very boring and ordinary, but it isn't. You're bringing hundreds and hundreds of writers from all over the world. It's an amazing organization, and these writers are of every type. Every sort, writing. Some of them are great writers. Some of them will never be known beyond their small country, for example. Many of them write in languages that are hardly translated into languages which have bigger reading publics. and so they feel very isolated. So it's a very moving thing when they all come together, and of course have wonderful moments, but also fight a lot and argue and discuss. And we've got to find a way to make this sort of work so that we don't get stopped by disagreements and difficulties of translation, because a writers' organization can't afford to have.
Thank you, פרופסור אוריאל אבולוף הלפלף, ששותה תמיד תה צמחים, prepared.
He's good.
He's good. Oh, he's excellent. Yeah, we should hire him.
Yeah, we can't afford to have hundreds of translators wherever we go, so we're going to have to find ways to do all of this. Anyway, I said my idea of this is that there's no point in me hanging around in Canada or the United States or England, where the headquarters is, or France or Germany. I mean, they don't need us.
Right.
They don't. Well, why would we be going to literary festivals? That's great, but I mean, it's not our job. My feeling is that you should be going directly to the countries where the writers are in prison or in danger, and trying to find ways, first of all, trying to get in, and secondly, trying to find ways to see the leaders of the country, whether the presidents or the prime ministers or the people who are in charge of the prisons, and just get to them directly and try to convince them. After all, the only weapon we have is language, So can we talk them into anything? Because if we can't talk them into anything, what else are we going to do? I mean, yes, we can send lots of letters, and we do that and so on. But to actually, if you can get yourself into a room with a dictator, maybe you can convince them not to become nice people, but maybe to release writers, maybe to give them better food, maybe to not torture. There are things that you can manage, maybe to shorten their prison terms. So it was we had to invent this kind of methodology, really a methodology. Like, I don't even really know that I can explain what it was, but a lot of the countries would normally not let somebody like me in. Just wouldn't be allowed in. But if you did it right, you somehow, there are ways of getting messages to dictators. I mean, there are ways of getting letters to them, getting personal messages to them. Sometimes, the diplomatic corps is very, very helpful. The right ambassador will actually have regular meeting with the dictator, and they will agree to take a letter from me and say, and explain who this is and what this is about, and would you receive them if they came. There are all sorts of ways in which you can, and that's just one, in which you can get to them. And so I just started traveling the world of authoritarian dictators and unpleasant governments, and you gradually figure out how to do it, because it's how to treat these people, what you have to do to get them to sit down with you. And the thing is, if you're going to a place somewhere in, say, the stands or something, and you start by, before you come, you write an article attacking them. Well, they're not going to see you. If you
so you refrained from doing that.
You have to refrain. You have to control yourself. Right. You can't be. You have to decide how to use the power that you've got of the word, and so you refrain to a great extent. Of course, Penn has taken position on the country. They've passed resolutions on the country, but as a person, as the president, I kind of kept myself slightly to the side. So that we would find a way, and they would receive me. And in a funny kind of way, they want to see the leader of the biggest human rights freedom of expression organization in the world.
But John,
it's a compliment to them.
Okay, John, who are they?
Well,
whom did you meet?
Well, I mean, they're, some of them are generals who did coup d'etats, or
Which heads of which states? Can you give us names?
Well, I mean, you just I'd have to sit here and run through them. You know, countries like, you know, Honduras, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. I mean, I'm terrible at coming up with lists, but I mean, just
Arab countries.
Oh yeah, I mean, a couple, yeah.
You met presidents, prime ministers.
Presidents, prime ministers, ministers.
Can you give a few?
No, I, you know, this is where I should have prepared, because I haven't talked about this in 12 years or something, and you and sometimes you see leaders who you don't really need to see that much, in order to ask them if they can get you in to see a leader they have a relationship with who actually has writers in prison. Mm-hmm. So that's another technique of how to do it, and in this funny way, they're sort of complimented that you're willing to see them, because they're used to being sort of shouted at by Western intellectuals. So the idea that the guy who runs the biggest organization to do with freedom of expression is willing to come to their country to talk to them, mm-hmm. is intriguing to them. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think, you know, I remember being in one of these places in Asia, in Southeast in Asia, and we managed to get in to see them, and we had a sort of there were two of us. There were really unpleasant meeting, difficult meeting.
Can you remember the name?
Well, I won't say in this case, because it might do harm. And there's these sort of three generals sitting on one side of a table.
Oh, now I know. Okay.
With, you know, in uniform with their hats on and looking very stern and unpleasant. And, you know, I tried every trick that I knew to try and get their attention about, well, these writers haven't really done very much. I mean, they haven't said very much, and, you know, one of them is very sick, and it would be wonderful if they could have medication, and, you know, could we talk about that? And, you know, really the present terms, you know, are really very unreasonable when you think of how little they've done. And from the point of view of the reputation of your country, this holds back the reputation of your country internationally. I mean, the only reason we say the things we say about you is because you're doing things that most countries don't do. And they say, oh, you mean Western democracies, which are only a handful of countries. And no, most countries don't do what you're doing. And it's really, it's not just that it's unjust, but it's actually bad for you. It's bad for your personal reputation, what people think about you in all countries outside of this area. And, you know, I'm trying to help you. You know, I'm trying to help you have a more reasonable existence as the head of this country. And anyway, it was a very unpleasant meeting. And then we sort of stood up to leave. And one of them said, well, are you free for lunch? And so you know, I have a principle. It really is, that's a joke, really. I have a principle, which is always have lunch with the dictator if they invite you. You know, because it's a real opportunity, right? You know, you don't have to give anything. You just, and they usually feed you quite well. You know?
I'm sure.
Yeah. And you get real time, like you get an hour and a half or something, not 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we were picked up, the two of us, and taken to, you know, this wonderful meat restaurant. Mm-hmm. I remember it was, and they appeared, there they were in beautiful cut Italian suits, you know, from their uniforms. So you suddenly realize, well, did they bring you know, I'm a writer, right? I'm thinking these things like, do you think they brought the Italian tailors here? You know, I mean, I'm a writer. I say, what's going through your mind is not what you're going to say. Or did they actually somehow very quietly go there to have these suits made? I mean, because they have to be made by a tailor to look like that. You know, I'm a novelist. I recognize details. You know, if you don't recognize details like what people are wearing and what it means, you can't write a novel, right? Otherwise, you're writing ideas only, not stories. So anyway, we had this lovely lunch, and they told us that their wives had heard that we were coming.
So it were the three generals who attended?
Yeah.
And you were with your...
With one other person, yes.
Okay.
And they said, after a little while, they relaxed, or seemed to relax, and they sort of said, well, you know, our wives, you know, knew you were coming and found out you were coming, and they said that we should see you because they read a lot of books, they like novels.
Mm-hmm.
And so we felt we should see you. So this is really hysterical, but okay, you know. And so eventually, I just started going back to the subject of the people who were in jail, and very nicely said, you know, I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult, you know, for you to just start providing the medications which the doctors say this fellow needs. I mean, you know, then people would stop saying that he was unjustly in prison. I mean, being in prison is another matter. One could discuss whether he was fairly put in prison, but and I had meetings, I'd arranged meetings with people in the legal system as well to talk about this. But to actually refuse medication to a sick person, I mean, you can't really want to do this. I mean, if you start talking to them like this, it's not that they become more human, but they start to realize that they don't look good. Mm-hmm. And of course, they want to look good. And nobody, thing about a dictatorship is nobody walks into the office or anywhere, nobody talks to the dictator and says, you know, sir, you should give better food, or you should let so-and-so in jail. Nobody does that. They're terrified, right? So they're not used to having people talk to them like that. And you know, in the end, I understand that they did provide the medication, and they probably improved some of the food. And I know one of the guys' sentence was cut in half. So in a way, the purpose of the story is that you can't really accomplish miracles in these circumstances with words. What you can do, though, is you can get some improvements. Mm-hmm. And you learn after a while that, you know, any improvement is, you can't be egotistical. You have to, all the time, you have to think about the people who are in jail, the people who are being tortured. That is the only thing you're thinking about. Not, did I get these people out of jail? Mm-hmm. Did I improve their life in any way? Any way. Anything that is managed is better for them, because it might help them get through to the end. Mm-hmm. They might actually eventually get out, and they'll still have a functioning body. They might not have gone crazy. They might be able to go back to their families. So I mean, you know, I spent 6 years doing that kind of thing. But sometimes you're in countries. I mean, I think Honduras is an example I've given, where there's just, at the time, there was just nothing. I went. I mean, a little group of us, and we tried very hard, but it was just like a wall. They just, you know, and it was very, I think that was where the chief of police was a former nun. I don't remember if that's the place. Nun. I think it was, I can't remember if that was there, or it was a Central American country. I thought the most surreal conversation I've ever had was trying to convince a former nun to respect human rights. I thought, how do I do this? Do I appeal to her Christian background? Do I, you know? But she was really tough.
What was her position? Head of what?
She was head of state police, I think.
Woman?
Yeah.
Would you like to? Is it okay to?
No, I mean.
Which country?
I think it was Honduras, actually. But I'm, you know, as I say, it was 12 years ago, so these things jumble a bit, and you have to go back to your notes to...
May she rot in hell.
Yes, well, that's probably being looked after by somebody else.
Damn.
If you believe in God, then you know that she's rotting in hell.
What a monster.
Yeah. But then, you know, there are other places like Nicaragua where you go to try and back up.
Was it Somoza? Who was then in Nicaragua? Somoza?
No, it's after Somoza.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another bastard.
Yeah, and it looked like there was some hope. and things weren't going too badly, but it wasn't all that good either. It was sort of teetering, and you see the authorities, you see anybody who has any influence, and then you, of course, see the writers who are not in prison.
You visited? Ah, okay.
Who are not in prison.
Have you visited people in jail?
Endlessly, yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, to the extent that they'll let you do it, you have to be careful you don't get used. They don't,
Get used?
Well, you don't become a photo op where they can say that, yes, they visited them in jail and everything was fine. And, they're criminals, of course, but yeah, that sort of thing. So you're all the time, you have to be careful you're not being used. And, they want to photograph with you because then they can say that they... So, I mean, I spent a lot of time...
So you refused?
Well, I always tried to avoid being photographed with them as a way of avoiding that kind of cheap evidence that they would have, that they would misrepresent. And, but now, all the people I saw in Nicaragua are now in exile. I mean, they a handful of them were very influential and great writers, just had to flee. Just had to flee when they got out time. I mean, it used to be in the West that most writers came out of the upper middle class. Those were the people who wrote and had the time to write. And of course, there are exceptions of, brilliant young people coming from poverty-stricken backgrounds who make it. But that's more an exception than a rule. And so writers have often been able to get out to, first of all, does the regime really want to put them in jail or kill them when they come from a well-known family, in these sorts of countries? Because they're making enemies of that whole family. But then that whole family probably is already an enemy. Often these countries are divided into 2 or 3 clans. But, if they can have the sense that they're about to be arrested, they'll get out and go into exile. But it's a horrible thing. I mean, they're forced to go and live somewhere they don't want to live. They don't have the career. They don't have the people. If you're a writer, after all, you write. First of all, you write in one language. So you're usually going into exile in a place where it's not the first language. So you're going to go into exile in the States or in Canada or in England or in France. I mean, those are main places. So, if you write in Spanish, it's not terribly useful. But if you write in a smaller language, smaller population-based language, you're completely lost. You've lost your public totally. So you're in a. I've met so many writers in exile who are living in a prison, a kind of intellectual and emotional prison, because they're cut off from the people who would be interested in what they have to say, would read them. So their lives are ruined, really. And of course, after they're dead, their words may get back into the country, that sort of thing. But that's not really. It doesn't do anything for their life.
So it has been 6 years, two terms, 6 years.
2 terms, yeah.
So, do you take pride?
Well, I mean, the first thing
probably you saved some lives. Come on.
Oh no, I think, and was it me? Was it a group of us? I think that what we did, and the people who came after me followed the same method, was I think we invented, partly me, a new way of doing this. The old way really had come out of the 30s and 40s and 50s and things, and where the writer spoke up. Well, now, of course, the writer speaks up. Doesn't have the same impact it did before television and when film was over there, and books were so revolutionary often. So I think that by developing this method of going right to the face of the dictators and, speaking directly to them was something new, quite new, and showing that I think people were worried before that if you did that, it would look as if you were compromising. Whereas what it actually was you were taking away the barriers that would allow you to say what we really feel and what we really want. Otherwise, what are they going to get? They're going to get a report from their Minister of the Interior on a half a page. We've been attacked again by these cretinous writers in the West or something. Whereas you're actually in their office and you have an opportunity to try to get through and make them feel something and make them realize that we will never give up saying what we're saying and doing what we're doing. And that if they are receiving aid from any Western country, we will do everything we can to stop aid unless it can be proved that it's going straight to people who need it. There are lots of things we can threaten to do, and threaten is the right word, because we have that kind of influence. What can we do that will make their lives uncomfortable? Can we convince people to refuse to allow them to travel into their countries? As you know, one of the things that disturbs dictators, and using that term, there are lots of other terms, a lot is that they're not allowed to go to Paris, on their holiday. They probably own a house or a big flat in Paris.
Good.
And in London.
Good.
They all, depends on which empire they come out of. But
I can't help telling you that just now our Prime Minister is facing such a case, being prosecuted by the court in Hague, and in that case he won't be able to go to
No, he won't be able to travel. He won't be able to go. He basically won't be able to go many places because there are all these international rules about that countries have signed on to, which means that if somebody who has been accused by an International Court of Justice, for example, lands in your airport, even to change an airplane, you have a duty to arrest them. Now, they may decide not to, but you have to know that they're not going to. You have to be absolutely certain that they're not going to arrest you, right? So, and once they've arrested you, this happens not that often, but it does happen. And it basically...
I remember Pinochet was arrested.
Yeah.
I wish somebody shot that monster.
He's a monster. But it is a system which can work, and it shuts down the ability of these people to have a life beyond their dictatorship. Maybe they can go to a couple of other dictatorships, but you gradually shut down their ability to have a normal life, any kind of normal life. And for a lot of them, the pleasure of being a dictator is the ability to go off and have fun and, eat in famous restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm being sort of light about this, but it's very interesting how if you can personally get at the lives of these people, and to the extent you can ruin it in as many ways as you can, they don't like that.
Good. John, we are meeting in a time, it's now May 2024.
Yeah.
And we are meeting in the time which is the worst in Israeli history, and in a time which is the worst for the Jewish people ever since the Holocaust. I'm coming from a democracy, but my democracy is now in jeopardy. We are afraid that we may one day wake up in a dictatorship, half dictatorship, or full dictatorship. Our writers are relatively free, they can speak.
Right.
But any message that you want to convey to, have you ever been to Israel?
I have not. It's an odd thing, but I have had a great interest in Asia and Southeast Asia. I spent a lot of time there. Great interest in North Africa and in Latin America. And in a funny kind of way, I became involved in the crises in those places. And I always felt, this sounds strange, I always felt somehow there were so many people who were experts in the crisis in the Middle East that I didn't really have much to add to it, Whereas I could really add something to what was happening in Central America or Burma. When I started going to Burma and writing about Burma, I think there was one other person in the West writing about it, Bertel Lindner. And so, you know, and I was able to take stuff that I saw there and write about it internationally. It took a lot of time, a lot of work. I would go and travel with the guerrilla armies and report back on what land was controlled by the guerrilla armies versus the horrible Burmese army. So I sort of...
They call it Myanmar.
Yeah, they changed the name to Myanmar. It's still the same thing. I mean,
yeah.
They're really... It's since '62. It's just been a list of generals replacing each other and really killing. It's just appalling. And this was
and
one of the richest countries in the world.
Much to our disgrace, Israel sells them weapons.
We sell. Well, Israel. I mean, you're not alone. You know, people should be really. There's no point in compromising with these people. There's no compromise. There's no advance to be made by compromising. And so I've devoted a lot of my life to places like that. And in a way, I don't regret it, but but I've never been, you know, somebody who was an expert in what was happening in the Middle East. But of course, I read about it endlessly, and be crazy not to. And it's difficult to avoid, you know. And it's a tough time. I mean, and obviously, the battle to maintain democracy in Israel is a very important battle. And a very, very important battle, and I've known in the past some of the writers, and I know that they do the best they can, but it's a very, very tough situation. Very tough situation, and now it's entering into a period for political reasons. And I think it's, you know, I would be the last person in the world. I would be one of the few people in the world who hasn't said something about the current Prime Minister of Israel. And I don't think it's really up to the standards of the people of Israel, you know, to have that guy. And this is something I write about a lot. The idea that you have to finish a war in order to change a leader is complete nonsense. I mean, that's just pulled out of a hat. Lots of countries, when they have an inappropriate leader, change the leader in the middle of a war. And somebody who says that they're the one who can win the war and then they'll go, that's nonsense. Wars don't work that way.
Absolutely.
It's complete and utter nonsense. It's just really somebody who doesn't want to give up power for various reasons, which are pretty obvious.
John, Ralston, Saul, it's such a privilege to share this beautiful house with you. Do you know the name of this village? I keep forgetting.
I don't.
It's not far from Hay-on-Way in Wales. So let's thank this festival. I'm thankful to this festival, how the light gets in.
It's on a beautiful river, the Wye River.
Yeah.
And it's not far from the sea. And so it's quite an active and live river, and the area is really quite historic in terms of English politics and dramas, you know, the fights between the Protestants and the Catholics and things. So it's a very, you know, we haven't talked at all about that at the festival because it's now a bucolic, lovely place, but it's historically been pretty dramatic. Anyway, it's great to be here, and it's been great to be here with you and to meet you.
Well, I wish you writing many more novels and influential books. Happy long life, and I wish myself that we will have the chance to meet again.
I look forward to
somewhere on the globe.
I really look forward to it.
Many thanks, John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.